My name is Lang Reynolds. I'm Director of Electric Transportation for Duke Energy. So my job is to electrify everything, and my team is responsible for developing and executing strategy and utility programs to drive adoption of electric vehicles across our service territories. Today, I'm going to be talking about the next generation of transportation electrification. I'm going to start off with where we are right now, just as a level set to talk about our strategy and some of the programs that we have in the market right now. I'm going to touch just briefly on COVID-19 impacts, and then wrap up with where we see things heading in terms of the next generation of programs and how we're leveraging AI to implement those programs and get to the next level of adoption. So to start off, for those of you who aren't familiar with Duke Energy, we are an integrated utility centered here in the Southeast, and we operate in 6 states as an electric utility. We have a little over 7 million customers across Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, the Carolinas, and Florida. And the interesting thing about our states from an electrification standpoint is that we have very little enabling policy that provides any mandates for electrification of transportation. So we have to lead a little bit on our own, and it's been a little bit difficult to get those regulatory programs approved. And so we're centering on electrification as economic development. Our main message to our stakeholders and our regulators is that electrification is good for all of our customers because it allows customers to save money on fuel, and that money stays in our local economies and doesn't go out of state to the oil-producing states and other countries around the world. In addition to retaining those cost savings in our states, we also believe that electrification puts downward pressure on rates by increasing system utilization of the electric system and spreading our fixed costs over a greater number of kilowatt hours. That's a pretty substantial benefit for our customers. And we see from some of the cost-benefit analyses that we've done over the past couple of years that this can add up to some pretty big numbers if we can drive more electrification of transportation. So if we can shift from the current business as usual trajectory to a high adoption scenario, there can be upwards of $65 billion of cumulative net benefits in a state like North Carolina. That's a pretty huge number over the next 20 to 30 years. And so that's something that we are using as the argument for why the utility should be leading on this and why it's good for all of our customers. In terms of the market right now, we see the biggest barriers for adoption of electric vehicles being awareness of the vehicles and their capabilities, infrastructure to fuel the vehicles, and the cost of those vehicles. And so we've really built out our programs to attack all 3 of those barriers. We have a large marketing and education initiative going to advertise EVs and their capabilities to our customers to make sure that they know that these vehicles are available, they're affordable, they're fun to drive. In a lot of cases, they're faster than their gasoline equivalents. And again, they provide those savings over time. On the infrastructure side, we're working to build out fast charging infrastructure, and we've also partnered with commercial fleets to make sure that they know about the cost savings and how to get this infrastructure deployed. We're also working on managing charging because we see the importance of, especially on the residential side, making sure that charging is managed so that it occurs off-peak. And then on the cost side, we're working to make sure that our customers have financial incentives available to them, not only from our own programs in terms of rebates and incentives, but also by working on OEM partnerships and state and federal grant programs, such as the VW settlement, to make sure that customers are really getting all of the available opportunities to implement electrification. On the infrastructure side, we have a program in Florida that's been up and running for a couple of years now, and I wanted to just talk briefly about the program in Florida since it's where we're getting the most infrastructure installed. We're getting a lot of data. We have a lot of good reactions from our customers on this, and some good press as well. So it's been a great program for us. We're installing infrastructure across 4 different segments. 3 level 2 segments in multifamily dwellings, workplace locations, and public level 2. And then on the DC fast charge side, we are installing those stations across our service territory, mostly along highway corridors to enable people to travel from one side of our service territory to another. Originally, We had the port targets of 325 ports for multifamily, 100 for workplace, and 75 for public level 2. We revised those a little bit given some difficulties we were having in the multifamily space. And so at the end of the day, we'll be installing 210 multifamily ports, 140 workplace, 130 public charging ports, and then 50 fast charging ports. All of these stations are utility owned and operated. We think that's important, at least in the pilot phase, to make sure that these stations are used and useful over the full life of the asset. We've seen a lot of examples in the market of deployments where the long-term operator is not able to maintain those stations, and that's kind of a black eye for the industry. It also is worse than having no station there at all if there's a station that doesn't work or it's fallen into disrepair. So we wanted to make sure that situation was avoided, and so the utility is owning and operating and standing behind that infrastructure over the full life of the asset. It's a 5-year program, and we're reporting annually on the program to the Public Service Commission. And one other feature about the program that we think is really powerful is the low income requirement to make sure that 10% of the ports are installed, at least 10% are installed in low income communities. And we're running well above that right now. That would be 53 ports out of the total 530. And we've already got about 85 of those installed in low income communities. So that's a great part of the program. In terms of the status right now, we have just under 500 stations installed, so it's been going very well. The stations are spread out across our service territory in Florida, and Florida is kind of a interesting service territory for us. It's very spread out. We have a lot of customers in the Pinellas County area around St. Petersburg, and then we also have a lot of customers around Orlando. We don't serve the city of Orlando itself, but we serve the outlying areas. There's been a lot of growth there lately with a lot of people moving to Florida. And so we've been able to get stations installed across the state and really provide some excellent coverage that increases the availability of charging infrastructure across the state of Florida. I mentioned we've had 83 stations installed already on the low income program, which is great. And we're seeing some strong utilization from the network already, including almost 40,000 charging sessions, over 537 megawatt hours of electricity has been dispensed through the network. And we calculated that this saves an estimated 53,000 gallons of gasoline, which is quite significant for the term of the program, given that we've just gotten started on this. Just a few more details on the Florida program, and I mentioned that we already have almost 500 ports installed. This is one of the fastest utility owned and installed programs when you look at programs across the country. So we've been very happy that our procedures have allowed us to get this infrastructure installed very quickly in a timely manner. We had 5 years to do it, and we're going to be done in just about 2 years, which is a pretty good to be ahead of schedule and well under budget. We're running significantly under budget, and so we think that proves that utilities can install this infrastructure in a way that is cost effective and provides benefits to all of our customers. In terms of utilization, we've had a strong increase in utilization over time, and I mentioned that the whole network has seen some strong utilization with over 500 megawatt hours of use since inception. And the trends have been going up as we've gotten more stations installed. We had our biggest months in January and February of this year before COVID hit, and I'll talk a little bit more about the COVID-19 impacts. But just a couple of notes about the utilization. We're seeing very strong utilization on the workplace chargers. That's by far the largest utilization on the whole network is coming from that workplace segment, even though it constitutes only about a quarter of the stations. And then the second most utilized segment is that public level 2 charging. So not surprisingly, the DC fast charging, we haven't installed that as quickly as the other stations. So we're seeing that utilization rise. But not surprisingly, it's a little bit lower on a percentage basis than the other segments, which is what you would expect when you think about the difference between a DC fast charger where people are only spending 20 or 30 minutes at the charger versus a workplace charger where people plug in the morning and they leave their car for 4 to 6 to 8 hours and it's charging potentially all day. So that workplace segment has really been very strong for us. a lot of the hosts are electing to provide that as an amenity to their employees. And that's something that is very popular, as we've seen from the utilization. And we think it's really helping with driving growth in our Florida service territory. We've seen that on the registration side of things. So the EV registrations in our Florida service territory are about 50% higher than the state of Florida when we looked at the growth rate in 2019. Given the fact that our program is the only thing that's different about our service territory versus the rest of Florida, we think that we can tie that growth back to our program and show that this program is having an impact on EV growth in our service territory versus the rest of the state of Florida. In terms of the COVID-19 impacts that I mentioned earlier, not surprisingly, we saw a big drop off in utilization in March and April as the stay-at-home order in Florida went into effect. And even before it went into effect, we saw folks not using the workplace charging as much. And given the fact that that was driving a lot of our utilization, that led to an overall decrease in the park and plug network utilization. So on average, we're still down about 20% versus the January and February numbers. But some of the segments have recovered, like the multi-unit dwelling segment and the DC fast charging segment. So EV drivers are charging at home in terms of the multi-unit segment, and then also on the road quite a bit, even though in terms of the public charging and the workplace charging, that's still down 50 to 70% as of August versus the January and February numbers. So just some interesting notes on the impacts that we've seen on the charging network. Not surprisingly, utilization dropped, but it's starting to increase and get back to normal levels as people resume normal travel patterns. So moving on to what we see as the next generation of electrification, I've talked about the programs that we have right now going on. And I want to talk about the next generation of electrification programs because we all see in the news and read about all of the electric vehicles that are coming on the market and the growth that we're expecting. And we think that utilities have a strong role to play, and we're going to have to move faster and more aggressively and get more proactive with our programs in order to both drive that growth in the market and accommodate the growth and make sure that it's integrated into the electric system in a cost-effective manner. So I like to break it down between the light-duty passenger vehicles and the medium and heavy-duty. And on that passenger vehicle side of things, we think the scale is going to get a lot larger. So we have programs right now, and for example, in North Carolina, there's a goal to get 80,000 EVs on the road by 2025. That's something that the governor has put out there. And that's a huge number of vehicles compared to where we are right now. Our current proposal in North Carolina for a program is a residential charging load management program for about 800 customers. So we're thinking about how do we move from 800 to 80,000? That's a big number. It's a big increase. And the programs that we're doing right now are much smaller, and we need to scale up, and we need to scale quickly. So things like that charging load management that I mentioned, we don't think that the programs that we have out there right now are going to be dynamic enough to take in that scale of participation. And other programs that we've seen out there, like time of use rates, we don't think those are appropriate either, and they're not going to scale in the same way that we need to really get to that next level of adoption. So on the rate side, we've seen that it could drive local spikes in utilization when those time of use time periods change over to the off-peak time. And that's something that could end up creating the same problems that we are trying to avoid in terms of folks plugging in and charging at the same time. So we need programs that can accommodate that and really manage that load in a way that doesn't drive the costs up for our distribution system and really avoid those costs for all customers. On the medium and heavy duty side, that's a segment where we see speed and scale happening in the near future. So we see this as a spreadsheet purchase for those customers. When the vehicles are available and they pencil economically, we think there's going to be a lot of adoption very quickly. When you hear about these semis charging at potentially 1 megawatt and depots with several chargers having 5 to 10 megawatts of load, that's a lot of load that could come on virtually overnight from a distribution planning perspective, when we're used to doing that planning in terms of several years normally. So we typically model over many years, and right now we're not really, our processes aren't built to respond to this kind of electrification that we think is coming. So what's the solution? Solving for this scale and speed that we think is coming. I'll start with the medium and heavy duty side of things. We are looking to leverage propensity modeling for these customers because we don't have a lot of visibility right now on where those vehicles are going. And if we think about contacting every customer that we think will adopt these vehicles, that's a very time-consuming and laborious process. So our forecasting system right now, we do have very, very strong capabilities on the light duty side, but that's really at the system level. And we need to expand that to the medium and heavy duty vehicle market, and also drill down to the distribution level and even down to circuits and feeders and figure out where these vehicles are coming so that we can make the appropriate adjustments and infrastructure investments on the distribution level to accommodate that growth. On the light duty passenger side, in order to accommodate that scale, we're looking at solutions like AMI disaggregation. So we want to find and target EV customers and get them into our programs. When we look at this kind of scale, tens of thousands of customers, that's difficult to accommodate in a program. We can't rely on people just hearing about the program from our website or perhaps a customer email. We want to be able to target these customers and know where they are before they even apply for the program. So the capabilities of disaggregation are really a good fit for what we see coming in the residential space. And it's also programmatically, it's much easier to implement because there's no infrastructure required. We don't have to use a smart charger. We don't have to use a separate meter or sub-meter. We can find these customers and get them enrolled in our program. And then as they charge, we can monitor that charging behavior and make sure that they are monitoring or managing their load in the way that is incentivized by the program. So it's a very lean approach. We think it can minimize costs. It maximizes customer choice on hardware, which is something that we like. We want to maximize customer choice. And so we also think it really drives market competition among EVSE providers and can hopefully wring some costs out of the system. So it really is a win-win. It's a more economic program for us to implement. And then for customers, they don't have to go out of pocket quite as much and get the infrastructure installed for a lower total cost for the customer. Those are just a couple examples of how we are working to leverage AI in our programs. And just to recap and bring this all to a close, just want to drive home the fact that we think that electrification is really a strong economic development initiative for the company. We have some programs underway, and they're a good start in getting the infrastructure built out. But when we look at where we want to be and what we think is coming, the industry really needs to get much more aggressive and much larger scale with our programs and our efforts. And in order to accommodate that and facilitate that, we're looking to technology programs like disaggregation and propensity modeling, and we think they play a key role in our EV programs going forward.